Welcome into the PFN Bengals podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, how's it going today? You were out at Bengals Minicamp for day 2 of Minicamp today. Joe Burrow was throwing, but maybe not with quite his usual zip. There's a lot to get into on today's show, but we do want to start with Minicamp takeaways. Jay, first of all, how are you doing today? And how did today go? How did Joe Burrow look? Just your overall kind of thoughts and sights and sounds from today's day 2 of Minicamp.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm having a good day. Joe Burrow, not so much. I mean, he just performance-wise, and he was throwing it better. I don't know if better is the right word, but he had more velocity on the ball than he was really kind of just taking it easy and floating balls, even in 7-on-7 yesterday. He had a little more zip on the ball today. The defense was getting him. I mean, there was a lot of pass breakups, and he even though he was throwing it better, it was still not what you're used to seeing from him. And so I think the defense was ready to pounce on that. And we saw that on the first play of 7-on-7. Jermaine Pratt tried to go in for a pass breakup against Charlie Jones, just a short little pass over the middle. And he didn't quite get there in time, so he ran through Charlie Jones, took him to the ground. There was a lot of oohs and ahs. You just don't see. I mean, that would have been notable in training camp when they're just not even hitting. And for this to happen in mini camp, it was something that there was no hard feelings. You know, Charlie said, "Hey, it happened. I got up. I went back to the huddle. It is what it is." No, like I said, no hard feelings. Just one of those things when guys are running around fast. Sometimes they get in each other's ways, in each other's way. But other plays, you know, DJ Turner made a couple really nice pass breakups, and it wasn't the best day for Joe Burrow. But that's all part of this process of recovering. And he had the end of May in mind to start throwing competitively, and we're a couple weeks from that. Nobody should be expecting him to look like he's ready to start the season. And there's going to be days when it's sore and he's just not able to let it go the way he normally does. And this is all part of the process. I thought, you know, the way he talked on Tuesday and just being so introspective and talking about his football mortality, I thought that was a good sign that he understands that it's not just about him and fighting through. He's got an entire franchise counting on him, an entire city fan base counting on him, and he needs to be smarter about these things. And he learned from the calf. He tried to push through the calf, and it almost derailed the entire season. So he's not going to do that with the wrist, and I think that's what we're seeing here in minicamp with these softer throws.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Joe talking about his football mortality. I thought that was just a really interesting way for him to put it, and just shows maybe a little bit of the maturation of the way he's just thinking about this stuff. Like you said, Jay, that he is the team. Yes, this team, the roster is talented up and down. There's lots of good players and lots of good positions, but we've seen for the most part what this team looks like without Joe Burrow, or with Joe Burrow at less than 100%, right? We saw it at the beginning of last season when Joe Burrow was out there. He was making passes. He was trying to do the best he could, but Joe Burrow isn't athletic enough, I don't think, to overcome an injury, even if it's a minor injury, even if it's not a season-ending injury. He is so cerebral, I think, and that's what gives him an advantage over so many quarterbacks in this league. But he's not the type of physical athlete that can just go out there and create things for the most part, like some other quarterbacks that we see around the league, like Josh Allen and other guys that can do off-script stuff, which is why it's so important for him to be healthy, which is why it's so important for the Bengals offensive line to be strong and keep him upright. And his changing mentality, I think, is part of that, to realize truly how critical he is to the system, to realize that he basically is the system for this Bengals offense, and that when he's not out there or when he is hindered, you're right, the entire team suffers, the entire team struggles. Him realizing that, I think, is just part of his ever-expanding leadership role, his maturation, whatever you want to call it, as the kind of personality, the number one guy on this team, and just realizing how critical he is to this offense moving forward.
Yeah, and he absolutely is critical. But I think part of this too is learning that it's not just him. That I think everybody thought last year if Joe Burrow didn't play those early games, they had no chance. And then we see what Jake Browning can actually do. And now it's like, okay, if you're not feeling it and you know, maybe it's it's not the worst thing to miss a game if he's not 100% healthy. I mean, not that he would sit out because he's sore, but you just don't have that weight on your shoulders where, oh, we have no chance unless I play. I have to fight through every little injury, and nothing was little last year. It was a serious calf injury and obviously a serious wrist injury. But I think that helps, having them seen what this offense can be with Jake Browning and not feeling like it's all on Joe Burrow and it's just going to fall apart if he's not there. It's not going to be what it is. They're not going to have near as good a chance of going to the playoffs or winning games, but it's not disaster time if they don't have him.
We also learned that Joe Burrow is learning to play piano. So that's an interesting note. I think that we found out that maybe that's probably not something he would be doing if he had some terrible wrist pain every day. He's probably not going to be trying to learn a skill like piano. So I thought that was kind of interesting. He did say he'll be ready to go by the season. I mean, he kind of put that to bed, that there's not any concern that he'll be ready to go by the time the season kicks off in September. That's the most important thing at this point. Like, it's hard to say anything else beyond that. We'll see how things go in training camp. We'll see what his throwing schedule looks like in training camp. We'll see how he's talking about his wrist once it comes to training camp. I think that'll give us a very good sense of where he's at physically and how he's handling the injury mentally. So I think at this point in the year, it's like everything else. Like what's real? You know, what certain guys lining up at certain spots or lining up with certain first teams. We don't really know what's real at this point. And I think Burrow's injury, I think it's safe to probably put it in that bucket as well.
Yeah. And he talked too about, his offseason started 10 weeks before everybody else's because he was doing such a serious rehab from the wrist injury. And he plans to take it easy over the 6-week break once minicamp is done after Thursday. That, a lot of the guys I've been talking to, I'm asking if they're doing anything fun. And they're like, no, it's go time. Yes, we're not going to be here, but it's not a time to just kick back and take vacations and relax. They are going to focus on training and getting themselves right and reporting in the best possible condition in July. And I think Joe is going to take some time off and listen to his body, listen to his wrist, and get that break that the other guys got when the season ended before they came back in April. He was going at it pretty hard trying to get that wrist back in order.
Elsewhere in offense, we saw Jamar Chase is back out there, but not really doing too much. He did a few snaps and walkthrough you wrote about, Jay, but not really participating as much and not in a full-time capacity in these practice sessions. Don't think it's too surprising. I mean, I don't really think anything is surprising with what Jamar Chase is doing right now. It's whether or not we expect the contract to come through before the season starts or wait until next offseason. I'm not sure how much this really matters. He's present. He's not getting fined. Not really talking, Jay, as you wrote about a little bit. Maybe that'll change in the days going forward, but it's kind of what we expected for Jamar Chase, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think this could be as much about the Bengals saying, just chill. You haven't been here this entire time. We trust you that you've been doing the right things, but still, it's different. It's the football shape and just regular shape are different. And the last thing you want is that guy suffering a soft tissue injury in a meaningless minicamp. And so he's out there for the walkthrough part, which is basically install new plays and they just walk through them at half speed. Sometimes quarterback doesn't even throw the ball on the route. They just kind of walk through everything. And he took part in that. And I don't think this is related, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I don't think it's related to the contract. He said he was willing to wait out Justin Jefferson, but you never got the sense that as soon as Justin signs, it's go time. I want mine the next day. I think he should be content to play this season out. He's gonna make $21.8 million guaranteed next year, regardless. That's fully guaranteed. They've already picked up the 5th-year option. That money is sitting there. So why not go out and try to have another great Jamar Chase type of year? And it just drives your value up even more. There's that debate right now. Is he worth jumping over Justin Jefferson? Well, he's going to have 17 games to prove it. And for the Bengals too, it just makes sense to wait and let this play out. So I don't think his absence from minicamp has anything to do with the contract situation. And maybe we'll hear it from him directly on Thursday when it wraps up. But I don't know. He said he wouldn't talk today. He said, try again tomorrow. That doesn't mean I'm saying I'm going to talk tomorrow, but try again tomorrow. And and the one thing too, Ben Baby from ESPN did ask him, he's like, are you healthy? He asked him this on Tuesday, the first day. And Jamar kind of was taken back. He said, what do you mean? Don't I look healthy? And it's like, well, we didn't see you do anything, but it's just, is this not participating related to health at all? And he said, no, he's good. I know he was rehabbing a couple injuries in the offseason, and he said he's good. And he looks more jacked, like upper body, arms, more physical. So interested to hear from him, but I don't know if we will. It might be training camp before we get some Jamar nuggets.
It's a huge season for Jamar. Like even we talked about it last week that the bar's been set, and now it's can he clear the bar? It's an absolutely massive season for Jamar, and I think massive for the Bengals to kind of expand his role too. If you can look forward and think T. Higgins is not going to be here in 2025, how do the Bengals continue to manufacture touches for Jamar Chase, continue to get him in advantageous matchups, move him around the field? I'm just really curious to see how Jamar Chase is used this year, and the production obviously that he ends up with. One more point on offense: Trent Brown is back in the building. He was in the building for phase one of the Bengals offseason program, but now he is participating in minicamp after not being there for OTAs. Talked about some family emergencies that he had, some stuff that was going on kind of behind the scenes. We'll see whether this means anything or not, down the road, whether Amarius Mims was able to use that time that he had when Trent Brown was not in attendance to overtake him for that right tackle role. We saw some jumbo packages with both of those guys being used together yesterday, 700 pounds of beef. I mean, I would love to see that in a goal line situation or something in the regular season. If we could see that, I'd be a total support of something like that. But just to see Trent Brown, I think, back was interesting. And he had some praise for Amarius Mims too. It said he doesn't really, he's going to be an all-time starting tackle in this league. That sure, there are little things to work on like any first-round pick, but he's liked what he's seen out of Amarius Mims too. So I think the fact that Trent Brown is back and kind of getting the work in and is good and kind of gives us a little bit of, the fact that he was gone was probably not that big of a deal.
No, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I do think it gave Amarius a leg up, and I am curious to see what happens if Amarius wins that job, and then does Trent become sullen? Is he not all in as a backup? I just he's had some of that reputation in the past, so we'll see. I mean, he indicated that the Bengals told him he would be the starter when they signed him in March. That was a month before they drafted Amarius Mims. So yeah, maybe they did tell him that was their plan, but things change when you draft a guy in the first round at that same position. So it's going to be fun to watch in training camp. It's going to be one of the more interesting position battles because I think it might be Trent Brown's to lose, but I think Amarius Mims, if he just keeps ascending and doing those little things that Trent Brown talked about, I mean, he's a heck of a specimen. Trent Brown's big, man. He's 380 and he looks every bit of it. And so we'll see. We'll see if he comes back in a little bit better shape for training camp. But it's going to be fun to watch.
I just keep coming back to his contract. I mean, 1 year, $4.75 million, only $2 million guaranteed. I mean, Trent Brown might be a little bit sullen if he doesn't win the starting tackle job, but I mean, it's like that contract right there should have told him back in March that this is not guaranteed, that the league doesn't necessarily view him as like, hey, you're a locked in right tackle starter. That's backup money, by today's prices. So I think, it's definitely possible that he is the swing tackle come week one, which is, again, not the worst thing in the world to have Trent Brown as your swing tackle. That's the best swing tackle in the NFL, if that's the case. So I think that's not all bad if that happens. Last thing we want to talk about from a kind of position battle perspective, and outside of the Joe Burrow stuff, maybe the most kind of notable news to come out of these mini camps is that Dax Hill is taking first team reps at corner ahead of DJ Turner, playing opposite Cam Taylor-Britt. Like we've said for all this stuff, like a note of caution. How much does it matter? We don't know. DJ Turner was taking first team reps earlier this season during the offseason program. It could be flipped back by training camp. We don't know. Maybe Josh Newton will be out there starting. Maybe the Bengals will have signed a free agent corner by then. We don't really know. But it is interesting, though. I think that Dax Hill has been given this chance, that he broke up some passes, that, as much as you can say someone looked good in an environment like this, he looked good. Got some praise from other players like Cam Taylor-Britt and said that, working closer to the ball and maybe working a little downhill is what's going to be good for Dax. it's interesting. That's as far as I'm willing to go. I think with this is that it's interesting that Dax Hill got these first team reps. Are you in the same kind of boat, or do you think this is maybe more important?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I wonder. We haven't had a chance to talk to Lou yet, defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. I wonder if it could even be a little bit of a reward where it has been DJ Turner running with the ones, and if they're happy with the work that Dax has put in and everything he's shown them running with the twos through everything until minicamp. And I thought maybe today we might see him flip. It might have been Dax with the ones yesterday and then DJ back with the ones today. That wasn't the case. Again, we're talking about, I think, Burrow threw 10 passes. So the one offense and the one defense were out there for 10 plays. It's not a big sample size, but I do. And you mentioned Josh Newton. I mean, I've been impressed with that guy, and he's not going to make this. It's not just, yes, it's a 2-horse race right now, but I wouldn't count that guy out. I mean, he's looked really impressive, and we'll see what happens in training camp. I bet he gets a chance to run with some ones just to see what he can do. And we've seen this. I mean, DJ as a rookie was like, oh my gosh, he's making all kinds of plays, and he earned. And even DJ Ivey, the 7th round pick last year, was like, whoa, the 7th rounder's out there making plays when he's given a chance. And so it's one thing that yes, it's disappointing Dax's career trajectory so far, but they've done a really good job at picking defensive backs. Jordan Battle, Cam Taylor-Britt, all these guys that they've been bringing in that have really played well. And that's what you've got to have. You're going to pay these guys on offense these incredible salaries. You've got to be able to hit on those early round draft picks. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. And I don't think if Dax doesn't beat out DJ Turner, it necessarily means he's going to be riding the bench. I think Lou's going to find a way to use him in different spots and in different schemes and alignments. And that's another thing that's not necessarily, it's not the position battle I'm most interested in is how they deploy Dax and in the different areas and what the scheme looks like once they get into training camp and we get to see something closer to real football.
We've seen Lou do that in the past at corner, sometimes by necessity. When Cheeto coming back from injury, like we've seen him have to kind of use those corners in a rotation. So it's not something that's like out of the realm of possibility that the Bengals are not willing to do. It has been done. And if you're right, if they get through the preseason and Dax Hill and DJ Turner both look good, then that's a good problem to have. And you don't necessarily have to choose, right? The NFL has unlimited substitutions. You're allowed to use these guys as much in any situation as you want. So it's the idea that this is one or the other between DJ Turner and Dax Hill. I think it's a good point to say it doesn't have to be. It could be both. It's just what does that look like if that is what the end game is. I think that's a really good point. Anything else from minicamp, Jay, before we kind of talk about some of our lists and evergreen stuff that we're doing this summer? Anything else that stood out from minicamp? And before you finish off tomorrow, assuming there is another day tomorrow, we don't know. Zach Taylor might cancel this. There might be a day off for some veterans. We don't know. But anything else before we kind of close the book on minicamp for this week?
Yeah, we saw them yesterday on Tuesday. We saw them really working the new kickoff alignment for the first time, and it wasn't so much who was out there that I took notice of. Was some of the kicks that Evan McPherson was trying. At one point I looked out there, I was like, why does he have the ball teed up like that? And it was like the tee was on its side and the ball was mostly on the ground, but it was resting nose up on the tee. And Evan runs up and kicks it, and it's like a whirlybird helicopter kick, and it's like, oh my God, he put it right where it needed to be, right at inside the landing zone at the edge, right by the out of bounds line. And it's like, that's gonna, even for experienced return men, that's gonna be a hard ball to catch. And
absolutely,
if it spins and it hits in the landing zone without it being caught, I mean, that's gold. The guys that you have lined up can't move until the ball's caught. If it hits the ground in the landing zone, they can take off. So they can be 5-10 yards closer to the return man before he even picks up the ball if it's spinning around and those guys are chasing it down, trying to pick it up. So it's going to be fun to watch. I preseason football is unwatchable. I mean, I know I have to do it for my job, but
I disagree. I disagree with you there, but okay, that's fine.
It's unwatchable for me, and it's going to be watchable this year just because of the new kickoff rule. Because I think it's going to be fascinating to see all the different iterations that these special teams coordinators come up with. It's going to be a wild experiment all through the preseason and probably the first half of the regular season. And I think the Bengals have a major advantage there. Darren Simmons is one of the longest tenured special team coaches in this league. He was diving into data and analytics of special teams long before analytics became popular in the league. So he's been on committees, on steering committees that look at rule changes. And I think the Bengals are going to have a big advantage with that guy at the helm of this new rule.
I can't wait to see it. I can't wait until we start to see stuff in training camp. I think maybe during joint practices, we can start to see some of this stuff come out too. And then preseason, like you said, definitely we'll start to see some of the creativity. Like I'm so excited. Like it's just the kickoff game has become so boring. It's like anytime anybody scores, it's time to go get another beer, time to go to the bathroom. Yeah. It's going to be a touchback. I'm so excited to see how this works. And you've already got coaches like, Dave Tube in Kansas City talking about using Justin Reed as a kicker. And because I think he estimated kickers are involved in like 25 to 40% of tackles in the XFL, who of course, that's where the NFL is borrowing these kickoff rules from. I mean, it's fascinating. It's how do you weigh that of having an extra tackler out there versus what you're talking about with Evan McPherson, the ability to do all these different sort of kicks and be delicate and have placement with the ball. Justin Reed isn't doing that, right? He's a safety. No. He could boot the ball down there and make a tackle. He's not doing any sort of creative little kicks or anything you're talking about like what the Bengals are practicing. So I think how teams and how different coordinators choose to balance that, I think is going to be really interesting. And Darren Simmons is as good as anybody in the NFL from special teams. So to see what he comes up with, the kind of innovations that he kind of develops, I'm very interested, in addition to who is actually out there, who is actually going to be handling the ball for the Bengals when that first kickoff comes. So I'm right there with you. I think it's going to be fascinating. All right, let's talk about some of these lists that we've been doing. Jay, your most recent lists, best Bengals teams of all time, top 10 Bengals teams of all time. This one came out a couple days ago. You've got at number one, you've got the 1988 Super Bowl team. No issues there at all. I actually have no issues with your list at all. Like I really wanted to get on here and rip you or roast you for this list, and I'm sure it makes better conversation if I'm doing that. But I really have no issues here, Jay. Like you did a great job. You did a great job with all these picks. I think it's interesting that you picked the 2022 Bengals team at third over the 2021 team that went to the Super Bowl. But again, can totally understand why you did it. By almost every metric, the 2022 team was better, even though they didn't go quite as far in the playoffs and didn't come just a few plays away from winning the Lombardi. It was a better football team overall. I don't really know what to say about this list other than good job. It's how I would rank the teams as well. It's exactly how I would put these teams. Anything notable that you kind of uncovered as you were going through this list, Jay?
No, I will say that some of the other beat writers in my age demographic took a little exception. They thought the 75 team should have been a little higher than number 6. I mean, they still 11-3, best winning percentage. I mean, they only played 14 games back there, so that's the best winning percentage in franchise history. 2 of the 3 losses were against arguably one of the best football teams ever to be constructed, the Steelers. They were on their way to winning a second consecutive Super Bowl. So 2 of their 3 losses were against the Steelers. The team the Steelers beat in the AFC Championship game, the Oakland Raiders, the Bengals beat in the regular season. But the way it was set up then, 3 divisions, 3 division winners, 1 wild card. Bengals were the wild card. That meant they had to go to Oakland for that playoff game, and they lost 31-28. I mean, that was a really good team. It was Paul Brown's final team. It was just, where they ranked was right there. I didn't, it's hard to compare eras, but I always like to look at, where did they rank in that time? Did they have the best pass offense? Did they have the best run defense? And I looked at the rankings, and it was right up there. They really did measure up, but the big issue was them in 2015, because both those teams lost in the first round. And the top 4, the 3 Super Bowl teams, and then the 2022 team that came up a bad penalty away from having a chance to go back-to-back Super Bowls. I felt like they had to be the top four. So it came down to 75 in 2015. And I watched in 75 as a young fan, as a 9-year-old. I covered 2015. I felt like that was a really good team. And had Andy Dalton not broke his thumb, that team could have been in that top four. I really think they could have made a long run in the postseason, but it didn't happen. I mean, the broken thumb was part of the season, and you have to weigh it all. But yeah, those were the two. Every time I do on these lists, there's one spot where it's like you just go back and forth and you beat yourself. As Carson Palmer versus Andy Dalton. Where do you go there? So Zach versus Marvin. Marvin's got the longevity. Zach's got the playoff success. So there's always that one debate, and I probably spend way too much time thinking about it. But I think most of the people that follow the team now that are younger would agree with me that 2015 team was better. But the olds up in the 50s, like me, a lot of them wanted to see 75 in the top 5.
I would put 2015 ahead, and it's hard to say. I was not there for the 1975 team. I definitely did not watch them. For me, if Andy Dalton would have been healthy in that 2015 playoff run, I really do think that they could have made some noise there. And you could say that you could say the same thing, of course, about the 2005 team that you had ranked 7th. That what could have happened if Carson Palmer didn't go down in the playoff game against the Steelers, and it's. These what if scenarios, it goes back to how do you weigh them? Are you even including that when you rank a team as better or worse? And I don't know, that 2015 team, I think from top to bottom, despite the fact that they went out in the first round again, of the Dalton Marvin Lewis era, that was the best team. It was the best roster from top to bottom. I think on both sides of the ball, that was definitely Dalton's best season. I mean, could have been an MVP candidate. Yeah. There's just so much that was going for that team until the fateful Andy Dalton injury. It's for me, it would be hard to put them below that 75 team, but I guess I can understand the argument from the olds if I have to. A couple lists that I've been doing, Jay. I had some Bengals related content too. I recently did a list of the 15 most underrated players in the NFL, and I just wanted to kind of call out the couple Bengals I had on there. Number 15, I started out with Lorenzo Neal, and this is a very subjective list, like probably as a subjective list as you could do. Like I moved to Cincinnati in 2001. This was kind of my entry into the Bengals world. Loved those teams. Loved Lorenzo Neal. This dude blocked for 11 consecutive 1,000-yard running backs. Like absolutely absurd. I had Justin Smith on that list as well. And then at number 3, I had Ken Anderson, who I know you've written about a bunch recently on the list of best quarterbacks. I had him as the number 3 most underrated player in NFL history. He's just, the 1981 season is his best season when he won the MVP award. You look at something like Pro Football Reference's Hall of Fame monitor, which looks at a lot of statistical accomplishments, awards, postseason success, and tries to put a number on a guy's career and says, should this guy be in the Hall of Fame or not? Ken Anderson's up there. He's above Kenny Stabler. He's above Sonny Jurgensen. He's above Bob Greasy. He's above Warren Moon. Mm-hmm. But he's never really gotten that chance. And I think, not having that Super Bowl is always going to hinder him. But just, as I've been doing these lists and kind of looking back at NFL history, it's been an education for me. And Ken Anderson is just, even as someone who's been a Bengals fan and Bengals observer, just truly looking back at how good he was, it's really been eye-opening for me as someone who didn't get to watch him play.
Yeah, I mean, just elite in terms of how many times he led the league in completion percentage and passer rating and just so many other yards per attempt. He was elite, and it's a shame that losing that one Super Bowl is really the difference. And they 82, they lost a bad playoff game, and he just didn't have the postseason success. It wasn't just the Super Bowl; it was not a lot of playoff wins to speak of overall. And he's always going to be underrated until he's in the Super Bowl. He's going to be underrated, and then as soon as he gets in the Hall of Fame, I think he can take that underrated label off. But I hope it happens. I hope he's a wonderful guy, and personality aside, he's just deserving based on the numbers. Lorenzo Neal, so you mentioned it in 2021 or in 2022, with the Bengals. He went to the Pro Bowl.
2002.
2002. He went to the Pro Bowl, and that tells you what his peers thought of him as a blocker, because that season, that Pro Bowl season, he had 9 carries for 31 yards. Yep. That's all he was just plowing the way for Corey Dillon. And if you go and look on YouTube, there's some like tribute highlight videos of Lorenzo Neal, and he is just pancaking guys, and then not standing there and gloating, going on and hitting somebody else after he buries one guy. It's just, he was a really fun guy to watch. It's a shame he only played 2 seasons in Cincinnati. Fans may not be that familiar with him. I mean, arguably the greatest fullback in the history of the game. He was something else. Justin Smith, you pointed out in the article, 8.5 sacks was, he never had more than 8.5 sacks. Yeah. He actually had that his rookie year in Cincinnati. There's only 11 guys in Bengals history that have had 6 sacks in either their first or second year. There's only 2 guys in Bengals history that had at least 6 sacks in both of those first 2 years, and it's Justin Smith and Sam Hubbard. And I think a lot of people look at Justin Smith as, kind of the guy that got away, that the Bengals drafted him in the first round, couldn't re-sign him. He goes on and has a really good career with San Francisco. And even so, even with that great career he had, you're right. I think he's still, maybe it's the name. Justin Smith is just kind of an anonymous type of name, but I think his career is largely overlooked as well.
Yeah, so when he went to the Niners, I mean, he was playing a lot of 3-4 defensive end where he wasn't getting the sack production that put him up there. And I do think when he went to San Francisco, though, that probably did help his kind of name profile because he was playing on those really good teams with the Jim Harbaugh teams kind of at the end of his tail run. He didn't get his first Pro Bowl till he was 30. He didn't get his first All-Pro till he was 32. I mean, I don't know if that's the latest in history, but it's got to be up there to never get recognition until the end of your career like that. I just thought was really fascinating.
Did you do did you do a honorable mention on that list? No, you didn't.
No, I did not.
Did you consider Willie Anderson at all for that?
I think he was on my long list.
Yeah.
Man, I don't want to put too many Bengals on here. Too overboard, but he's definitely on the list. I guess maybe I've got faith that he will get into the Hall of Fame at some point, but I did put other guys on here that I like. Jared Allen, I think will get into the Hall of Fame eventually. So yeah, I think he could have been in consideration. And if I did an honorable mention, I think he'd be on there around that back end. Yeah. Also, I had Ken Anderson on a list I did of the best quarterbacks without a Super Bowl. I had him number 6 on that list. Same kind of thing. Why he's underrated. He just doesn't have that kind of hardware. And the last one I'll just toss out here, I did a list of the best coaching trees in history. I had Paul Brown at number 5. I had a couple guys ahead of him, but Paul Brown's coaching tree is just outstanding. Obviously, it's led by Bill Walsh. Everyone knows that the Bill Walsh coached in Cincinnati under Paul Brown and got his start there. But gotta say, I was not familiar with the name Weeb Eubank. Jay, I don't know if that's a name that you're familiar with or not, but
I have a good Weeb Eubank story.
Let's hear it. I mean, for those who don't know, which I certainly did not, he worked under Paul Brown and went on to coach the Baltimore Colts to multiple NFL championships. He took the Jets to Super Bowl III, the Super Bowl that Joe Namath guaranteed. This was my first introduction to Weeb, but Jay, it sounds like you know a little bit more about him than I do.
Yeah, so in 1990, he coached at Miami University, which is cradle of coaches. So Woody Hayes coached there, Paul Brown. I mean, there's a lot of legendary coaches. Sean McVay. It just goes on Harbaugh. So in 1994, it was the 25-year anniversary of Super Bowl III when Joe Namath predicted the Super Bowl win, and we was still living in Oxford. And so I called him up and asked if I could do a story, and he invited me out to his house. And I should say house because it was a museum. He had every game film, every practice film, every playbook. His basement was. I was almost reluctant to mention it in the article because he was getting up there, and his wife was really struggling with health at that time. And I'm like, here's these like 2 older people, and they've got this just wealth of NFL memorabilia in their house. Do I publicize that? But he could not have been nicer. And it was just, I mean, I could have stayed there all day and talked to him and just he took me around the basement and showed me all the stuff that he had saved throughout his career. And it was, I was just in awe. It was one of the most favorite stories I've ever done. And still, I was sad when he passed. I met him one time in my life, and I was sad when I heard that he was gone. And so, yeah, very, very familiar with Weeb. I was not familiar with number one on your list. I consider myself a bit of a football historian, and I had never heard of Jim Lee Howe.
I had not either. I will be honest. I threw these out to one of our editors, Dan, tomorrow, and in his initial comment to show you how tapped in he is to NFL history, where's Jim Lee Howell? He's got to be number one. For those who don't know, Jim Lee Howell, he had Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry on his staff with the New York Giants in the 50s. I mean, you really can't get better than that, to have two of the all-time greatest head coaches as your offensive coordinator and as your defensive coordinator. I mean, it's unbelievable that even happened in NFL history.
And Paul Brown gets obviously credit for having Bill Walsh on his staff, but does he get dinged for not hiring him and letting him go? And what
it's a very good point.
The 80s could have been if the Bengals had just hired Bill Walsh instead of letting him go to San Francisco and turning them into the team of the 80s.
Seriously. I mean, I've got Mike Shanahan on my list at number 7. You look at the guys that were on his staff with those Commanders teams, his son Kyle, obviously, but Sean McVay and Mike McDaniel and Matt LaFleur. It's like, Washington, hire one of these guys and you could have been okay for the past 10 years instead of this debacle that you've gone through. It really is amazing to look back and some of these teams and see, you've got these legendary guys in your building and you just didn't see it. And that's just how it works out. It really is fascinating to see how many times that's happened throughout history.
McVay's got to be knocking on the door of that list too.
Yeah, absolutely. He is up there. I mean, obviously we know with Zach Taylor and Kevin O'Connell, and I mean, his list just goes on. And even this year with Raheem Morris on the defensive side of the ball, right? Guys like Brandon Staley, who have already been hired and fired, have come from the McVay coaching staff. It's
Shane Waldron now is with the OC in Chicago. He's on his way. He's going to be a head coach before long.
Yeah.
And did Cliff come from Sean?
I don't think they ever worked together. Okay. I think the thing with Cliff was that when the Cardinals hired him, I believe in their press release, they mentioned that he was a friend of Sean McVay. Yeah. Just the fact that you even know Sean McVay is enough to put that on your resume. So it's pretty interesting. Pretty beneficial to be attached to Sean McVay.
For sure.
An NFL coach, I think. Last thing, Jay, here, we got the Tom Brady Patriots Hall of Fame induction ceremony going on Wednesday night. We know a lot of you are probably listening to this on Thursday, so this already happened, but not that anybody else needs to talk anymore about Tom Brady. Everyone knows who Tom Brady is, but we do. Jay, you've got some interesting stats here on Tom Brady, and just maybe give a little bit of our thoughts on Tom Brady and what he's done to the Bengals over the years.
Yeah, I was curious, how many Bengals can say I've sacked Tom Brady, and the number is 11. Vontaze Burfict 2 in one game. He's the career leader with 2. Wallace Gilberry had 1.5 in that same game. That was the 2013 game when the Bengals snapped Brady's NFL record streak of consecutive games with at least one touchdown pass. Michael Johnson's on the list. Geno Atkins also had one in that 13 game. I mean, they really got to Brady in that game. Carlos Dunlap, Pat Sims, Dwayne Clemens, and then more recently, Logan Wilson, Sam Hubbard, and then back a little bit farther, Robert Geathers, and then again in that 2013 game, Chris Crocker, the safety, came on a blitz and shared a sack with Wallace Gilberry. So 11 guys can say, hey, he's soon to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer, but right now a New England Patriots Hall of Famer. That's a nice feather in the cap. And then in terms of picking him off, Jermaine Pratt and Trey Flowers both got him in that 2022 game in Tampa Bay. And then Adam Jones had the game sealing interception in that 2013 game. And Torrey James back in 2006 and Leon Hall back in 2007. So 5 Bengals have picked off Tom Brady. And if I think about Brady moments with the Bengals, it is that game. I remember Mike Zimmer saying at one point that Brady kind of looked over at him and gave him a nod, like, yeah, you got it going. And this is respect, basically, is what it was. And the other thing was, as great as the Bengals defense played in that game, the Patriots defense held the Bengals down too. And the Bengals had the lead. It's late in the game and they have to punt it back to Tom Brady. and the Patriots, and it's like, oh, you know what's going to happen. It's like Joe Montana in the Super Bowl all over again. He's going to get the ball. As soon as they line up in punt formation, the skies open, and I've never seen it rain harder at a game I've been at in person. It was just torrential. And Kevin Huber unleashes like a 70-yard punt in this monsoon, and then Brady still drove down in the rain, and I don't remember what yard line they were on. They were getting close, but it was inside the 10 when Adam Jones picked off the pass and ended the game, and it was crazy. It was like it was meant to be with the skies opening up and just war. And it was week 5, so it wasn't like super cold. And I think the fans were just very rarely are fans happy to be sitting or standing in the rain. I think that day they were, because they knew it was working to their advantage.
Yeah, I think my biggest Brady Bengals memory is the "we're on to Cincinnati" moment in 2014. That after the Brady and the Chiefs, or Brady and the Belichick just got destroyed by the Kansas City Chiefs in an early Monday Night Football game that season. And I remember there was even talk that Belichick was asked, like, is Tom Brady still your starting quarterback? Yes. I believe you, right? And it's, he just couldn't even handle it. And "we're on to Cincinnati" became that famous phrase. And unfortunately for the Bengals, they were on to Cincinnati. It was a 43-17 win the next week. Patriots only lost 2 more games that entire season and then won the Super Bowl in that Malcolm Butler interception year. So it's, not the best moment for the Bengals. They kind of spurred the Patriots onto another one of their many titles. But that's kind of the moment I always remember for the Bengals, is they were just kind of the whipping boy for Tom Brady to maybe get back on track, and kind of for Belichick to get some of that noise and that distraction maybe out of the system a little bit.
So that week, what I remember is, back in I mean, it's only a decade ago, but back then we would get a player and a coach on a conference call on Wednesday, and that conference call with Bill was about what you'd expect. It's like most conference calls you see when he's standing in front of. Just was, asking about the on to Cincinnati thing. He's just mumbling answers. And then Jeff Hobson from Bengals.com asked him a couple questions about Paul Brown, and he lit up, and he couldn't stop talking about Paul Brown. And it was just a really interesting press conference it had nothing to do with the game, but it was just him going on about his reverence for Paul Brown. And it was kind of cool to hear that side of Bill Belichick, because all you were used to seeing was the press conferences where he's just surly and dismissive. And so that's what I remember most about that week.
I feel like if you ask Bill Belichick about NFL history, lacrosse, or special teams, he will open up. Anything else, it's the lid is going on. It's no comment. But those 3 topics, I feel like he will expand if you get him in the right moment. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, Jay, I think that's our show. Kind of a grab bag episode today. Not a ton of newsy stuff going on. We'll be back next week. Maybe talk about training camp preview or something we'll get into for next week, Jay. But anything else before we sign off on this episode of the PFN Bengals podcast?
No, I would say, next week we're going to kind of wrap up the off season, but we want you guys to be involved. So if you have questions, tweet them at Dallas, tweet them at me, email me, send in your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them on the show. We can't have you pop in live, but do as much as we can to make it interactive and get your questions in, and mention your Twitter handle as long as it's not profane.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I still have a lot of questions about this Bengals team and what we should expect in training camp. So I'm interested to hear what all of you guys do too, and what you're thinking and what you want, when Jay's out there on site, what he's looking for and what we're talking about on the show. We want everyone to be involved. So please do send those questions. Anything you've got Bengals related or otherwise, really, we'll answer anything. We don't care. We'll take any questions you've got. Other than that, we'll be back next week. So thank you again for listening to this week's show, and we will talk to you next week.